All right, now, it is true that regardless of the amount of spiritual living that we do or spiritual knowing, that some about us do not respond. We're in agreement on the fact that one of the greatest witnesses to the spiritual life is the Master, Christ Jesus. And he couldn't avoid his Judas, or his doubting Thomas, or his denying Peter, or his disciples that fell asleep in the garden. So you can see that there are moments in the lives of many when they cannot respond even to the spiritual influence that is about them. Undoubtedly, Peter awakened and atoned in a measure, and probably Thomas did. Judas we have no record of, but that is no record of his awakening to the spiritual light. We do know there must have been a time when Saul of Tarsus couldn't respond to the spiritual impetus, and yet at a certain given moment he not only responded to it, but he became a living witness of it. And so we need not despair if we find some around us, in our families, in our church groups, in our national or international life, who are not responding at this moment to the spiritual impulse, because they will in their time. And with some of them it may be days, weeks, months, or years, and with some of them it may be many lifetimes to come. But at some time or other, every knee will bend. Every knee. At some time or other, all men will be taught of God. And so we need not be concerned about those who do not at the moment respond. And that takes us to a very important point. In our experience, we are apt to believe that we are held back by someone's lack of demonstration, someone around us, or that we are victims of others, or that for one reason or another the lack of demonstration on part of one may have an adverse influence upon ourselves. Now this would only be true in the degree that we would permit it, so that in the last analysis there's no use of blaming the other fellow, because it is we who have permitted it. We have the authority of the Master that in order to attain the actual height of Christhood, it becomes necessary to leave mother, brother, sister, father for my sake. Leave your nets, leave your father, and I'm sure you know that many of us have not done that. And in that degree then, we are responsible for our lack of demonstration, because we have not become ready to leave those who are acting to hold back our demonstration. So let us not blame them. Let us blame ourselves for keeping ourselves under their influence. Now, there is a way whereby it is not necessary physically to leave mother, father, sister, or brother, although there may be exceptional cases where that must be done. There are exceptional cases where men must leave their wives, or wives must leave their husbands for the sake of their own freedom, but those cases are rare. We're not going to speak of those now. We're going to speak of the usual case, which is ourselves, where ordinarily that is not necessary. The way for us is this. You will find this in the 15th chapter of John. It is in that chapter that you learn that ye are the branches, I am the vine, and the Father is the husbandman. Now let us for a moment visualize a tree and note its branches and note that trunk that we call the vine, and then look under the ground to the roots there, and start with a realization that we are the branches, that the invisible Christ is the trunk of the tree, and that God is the root and substance in the ground. Now note that, just look at one branch on the tree, and note its connection with the vine, the trunk of the tree. And follow that down into the ground, and note the roots and surrounding earth. We call that God, the husbandman. Now this branch, because of its contact with the trunk, and because of the trunk's contact with the roots and earth, that branch is supported, maintained, and sustained in its individual integrity. All the other branches on the tree may be blown off, or chopped off, or sawed off, but this branch at which we are looking still maintains its permanence, its life, its fruitfulness, by virtue of the fact that it is connected with the trunk and with the roots. Let us note now all the branches around this branch. And you will note that none of these contribute to the branch at which we are looking. They also have their independent existence, independent from each other branch, but dependent only on their contact with the trunk and with the roots. Now, if one branch were to complain about another branch not cooperating, if one branch were to complain about another branch not sharing, we would, of course, ridicule that and say, how can you be concerned about that when you yourself are connected with the trunk and with the source, the roots and the ground, and you have nothing to do with any. Oh, but the answer comes back, but that's my mother and brother and sister over there. Those are my brother. I'm responsible for them, or they're responsible for me. Oh, no, you're not responsible for them. They're not responsible for you. You are a branch connected to a trunk, and it in turn is connected with the root, and that's your sole responsibility to maintain your contact with your vine, with your branch, with your trunk, and your roots, and flourish. You'll agree that is the truth of being about the branch. No other branch can have an adverse influence. No other branch can be a conflicting or destructive influence, since each branch has its contact with its source. Now the Master tells us that that is our relation to God, that we are the branch, and that I am the vine. I, Christ, within, the Spirit within, is the vine, and the Father is the husbandman. Now, if I am a branch, and I have contact with a Christ or Spirit of God within me, and through it a contact with the great universal thing called God, what has my demonstration to do with that of anybody else on this earth? How can anyone possibly influence, benefit, or hurt my demonstration? How is it possible for anyone to act or operate to interfere with my contact with my Christhood, with my vine, and with my husbandman? Oh, certainly. If I say, no, I want to be dependent on you for my support. If you want to say, oh no, I want to be dependent on you for my treatment, then we make ourselves dependent. There's no use then of complaining about each other. If an individual accepts the universal belief that their support, their supply is in husband or wife or investments or business, they themselves have brought themselves under the law. They may do it before they come to spiritual wisdom. They do that ignorantly. Then everyone is a victim of circumstances. That no one can help, because as long as one is ignorant of the law, they're under the penalty of the law. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. Sometimes gets you off, but it really isn't an excuse. Now then, once you come to spiritual wisdom and learn of your true identity as a branch with an eternal relationship, contact with this inner thing that we have called Christ, the Spirit of God, Emmanuel, any name you wish to give it, the divine presence, divine mind, anything. As long as you now know that within you is an invisible presence which in its turn is connected with the whole universal source, if you then continue to place your faith in princes, your reliance on friends or families, if you then continue to go about trying to get the help of other branches, you have brought upon yourself the penalty of not turning to your Christhood and your divine source. Then there's no use of blaming the other fellow for interfering with your demonstration. It is possible for all of us to live in this room, and yet for each one to maintain the integrity of their contact with their source and never become dependent on one another for anything. In a cooperative, yes. Sharing, yes. Yes, cooperating, sharing, certainly. Living harmoniously together. But from what? From our own resources? No. From our Godhood. From the husbandman, the father. So that whatever we share with another, whether it's a word of truth or whether it's a dollar bill, we have the right to say, that was mine. I gave you mine. I loaned you mine. I shared with you mine. It never was mine. It never was. Always, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. And so whatever we share with each other, we're not sharing of ourselves. We're sharing of the infinite bounty of God. Limitation comes when we say, I gave him, I loaned him. No, I helped him. No. All good is in this common source, God. That's where the true communism comes in. That the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, and son, all that I have is thine. Now share it liberally. Share it as liberally as you want, but don't claim that you are sharing that which is yours, because that sets up the limitation. That is why people of philanthropic nature who end up, as some do, broke, say, I wonder why that happened. I was always so generous with what I had. I always gave so liberally, or I always loaned so liberally, and now I have nothing left. Yes, it was the very fact that they believed that what they gave or what they loaned was their own. And if it was their own, it was limited. If it was limited, it had to come to an end, no matter how noble the purpose. Once you realize that anything you give or share never was yours, and you have no personal sense of glory about sharing it or giving it, since it came from that source, it can never run dry. The source, which is God, never runs dry. If you are drawing on that, you can never lack. If you are drawing on your resources, whether for yourself or whether for charity, benevolence, or foreign countries, remember this: there is an end to it, and you may even, in spite of your good-natured sharing, you may end up with nothing. But once you give up the sense of personal possession in the realization that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, and Son, all that I have is thine, and so I'm just sharing that which is of the Father, you will find that you have tapped an endless source, and there will be no running dry of that well. Always, however, there must be the conscious realization of the 15th chapter of John. Now you're going to learn a strange thing in that chapter. I expect soon that we're going to have either a book with that chapter in or a booklet of that chapter itself, whichever can be arranged first. As you study that chapter, you find a strange thing, that every branch that beareth not fruit, the Father purgeth. You know, the branch that beareth not fruit is that branch that is living unto itself and is thinking of itself as separate and apart from the vine and the husbandman. That branch that thinks it has its own wisdom, its own life, its own supply, and is always being liberal in giving it or sharing it, or isn't being liberal in giving it or sharing it, fearing a lack. The branch that is living unto itself is ultimately purged. That's why we come back again to the Master's two commandments. Until you acknowledge God as your source, and until you acknowledge this universally, loving thy neighbor as thyself, you are the branch trying to live unto itself, trying to draw its fruitage out of its little branchhood, and ultimately finding itself running dry and then being purged. The only way to understand and to demonstrate life eternal is to understand God as the source of all being. Now, none of this can we make true. All of this is already true. If it is not being experienced by us, it is only because we have not yet acknowledged it as truth and opened ourselves to that flow. The moment we consciously, and I repeat from the other evening, all of this becomes an activity of our own consciousness. The moment we open our consciousness and realize our relationship with the vine, the invisible vine, and the husbandman, from that moment things begin to happen. In the same way, from the moment that we withdraw our labels from God and stop this saying God is such and such, and live only with God is, God then fills us with its truth, and that truth is our meat, our bread, our wine, our water. That truth is life eternal and is the source of our unending and limitless supply. We do this through an activity of consciousness. We cannot make it happen. There is a story in Scripture that illustrates the power of the powerless, the power of that which to our sense is not power. And that is the story of David and Goliath. In the story of David and Goliath, you have this giant, not only a physical giant, but just read that description of his armor, and you will know that no power could penetrate it, nothing could reach him, nothing could harm him, nothing could destroy him, because he was so armored as to be invincible from any weapon that had up to that time been conceived or formed. Certainly there was no weapon on the outer plane that could penetrate the armor in which he was clothed. But the story goes on that a little bit of a fellow comes along with a few pebbles, a few stones. And it just takes one of those tiny little stones to end the career of this mighty giant clothed in this heavy armor. That's fantastic as a story, of course. Really is fantastic, this idea of a little stone leveling a giant, and a giant so completely clothed from head to foot in heavy armor. But the secret of that story is this, that David says, I come to you in the name of God. That's the mystery. That's the miracle. That's the secret. I do not come to you with physical power. I do not come to you with physical might. I haven't come with a weapon stronger than the one that you have fashioned. I don't come to you with a weapon stronger than your defense. No, I come to you in the name of God. The Master gives us a, shall we say, a correlative story when the disciples come to him, so happy, so proud, that they have been given power over the devil. Even the devil is a subject unto us. And they're rebuked. Oh no, the devils aren't subject to you. Just be grateful your names are written in heaven. That's all. Nothing is subject unto you. Just your names are written in heaven. What does that mean, your names are written in heaven? What does it mean the devils are not subject unto you? In other words, there isn't any power. There isn't any power subject unto you. You are in the name and nature of God. There are no other powers. You see how we come back always to our infinite way basis, platform, foundation. And that is that we stand in the name and nature of God. That is why there is no weapon formed against us that can prosper, not because we have any defense, not because we have any weapons over the devil. No, just because we stand in the name and in the nature of God. Now let us see that at work. Were I to acknowledge that any person or other influence or power on earth could be destructive to me in any way, shape, manner, or form, I would certainly have to have some form of defense against it, some form of power. But I have the mightiest one. And that is the realization that there is no other power than the name and nature of God. That there is no destructive influence, unless God be the destructive influence to any concept unlike itself. And so the God power, the God realization in me reveals that nothing in the world of effect, nothing in the world of concepts, nothing in the world of persons is an evil power. And therefore, I need nothing with which to overcome evil. Watch that in your personal lives as some threat comes to your person. from individuals or armies or bonds, and stand fast in your nature, in the name and nature of God, in the realization that no weapon that is formed, no concept that is formed has power over the truth of being. And note the difference. And the same when you come to the healing work. If you have accepted the belief of infectious and contagious diseases, or inherited diseases, or any other form of disease, watch what happens when you give up your mental weapons and stop fighting them. Watch what happens when you stop fighting diseases and causes of diseases and recognize that you stand in the name and nature of God, and there isn't any weapon, there isn't any belief, there isn't any concept of man that can stand in opposition to the name and nature of God. Why? It tells us in David and Goliath, the battle is the Lord, not yours or mine. We need no physical powers, we need no mental powers. That which is the least of them, a little stone, is sufficient to the tearing down of the stronghold of the mighty Goliath. Even a tiny little bit of a stone. In other words, nothingness. That which to us represents no power at all, a little stone, that it is that overthrows the mightiest power when that power is physical or mental. When the power is spiritual, it is a self-maintained, a self-created, a self-maintained, a self-sustained power, and you have nothing to do but stand in its name and nature and let yourself be clothed with the spiritual armor of truth. The spiritual armor of truth is not a weapon to be used against error. The spiritual armor of truth is the realization of omnipotence. One power, that creative influence which not only created but maintains and sustains itself unto eternity. If you acknowledge that you are some other self, then beware. Then you've set up that which has to surround itself with armor plate. Once you have acknowledged God as yourself, let God be its own defense. Then use no physical or mental weapons. I had a very, very sad experience some years ago when I became involved in a lawsuit. And in the midst of it, the still small voice said to me, those that use the sword will die by the sword. Those that live by the sword will die by the sword. And it came in such a way as to make me understand that I had no right to go to law. Not even in this case where I was morally right and where I had been assured not only by attorneys but by judges that I was legally right. But instead of taking the word of God, I decided to seek the advice of men. And I was told I was very foolish. I was just letting my substance be taken from me. It represented a small sum of money, but that small sum of money was all the sum of money that I had. And so I was convinced by others that it was my right to defend it. But the warning came the second time. Those who live by the sword will die by the sword. Do not go into court. But my friends prevailed against God. I went into court. I not only lost the case and $3,000 lawyer fees too, but a whole lot of reputation besides before I got through. Well, I was just torn to shreds in that case. It was very sad. It was very pitiful. It was a hard lesson, but it was one that I've learned. The law is a fine thing, just as armies and navies are fine things, for those on that level of consciousness where they live by might and by power. But to those who come to a higher level of living by the Spirit, it is a wrong thing to use earth's weapons, men's weapons. Let us stand clad in this armor of the Spirit, and we will never find injustice against us. I know now that I would not have suffered injustice had I not gone into court. I brought it on myself. It was a lesson for me, but not only for me, it was a lesson for all of our students who can come to the realization that there is a period in their experience when they must not resort to medicines or surgery. And don't forget this, that all of us at some time have fallen down on that too and used our medicines and our surgery. And probably we will again. There may be temporary experiences of that nature, but we're speaking now of a principle by which to live. It may well be that some of us may be induced to use the weapons of the world, but if it is possible to avoid it, do it and place your full confidence in the fact that the battle is the Lord's, not ours, and that we only need to stand in the name and nature of God to find our sure defense. Now you see, there is a power, but it isn't a power over other powers. It is just a power of self-maintenance, a power of self-sustenance. That is the power. And so we will learn that there is a love, not a love that we use for a purpose, but a love that embraces us within its law and maintains and sustains our being. Let us rest for a little while. Prevents a healing. And we have a dozen different answers. None of them may be satisfactory, but they're the best that we can do. In some cases, the Master said the disciples had failed to heal, and the Master said, "This kind goeth not out, but by prayer and fasting." And so we understand that there was a type of claim, disease or condition, that did not respond to the ordinary treatment, that required something higher, something that apparently only the Master himself was capable of. So we find that in this work there are claims that yield to the practitioner working on the spiritual level that will not yield to a practitioner working on the mental level. In other words, there are people who do not receive physical healings from medicine. Medicine just does not seem to benefit them. Yet when they find a mental practitioner, they respond very quickly. But there are many people who do not respond to mental treatment. But if they find a practitioner who works on the spiritual plane, they respond very quickly. Now, you may say, who are these spiritually minded practitioners, or practitioners who work only on the spiritual plane? And I will say to you that in my experience I have not found many. Almost all metaphysical practice is on the mental plane with a little of the spiritual touching it. But there are some, and it is a matter of demonstration to find them. Each individual must go within himself and ultimately be led to the practitioner who can meet his or her need. Now then, sometimes the practitioner, even on the spiritual plane, will fail to meet certain cases. And that may have to do with the fact that that practitioner may not at the moment be himself or herself on a high enough level of spirituality. Or it may be that the patient is not yet ready to yield, to give up their nets, their physical sense of existence, whatever the name or nature of their state of consciousness is, that is binding them in the claim. Sometimes the practitioner's influence will compel them to yield. At other times, they will cling and cling and cling to some state of consciousness that makes it impossible for them to yield. Now, in other cases, you have experiences like this one. When I spoke of this morning, and that was our good friend in Boston, Mrs. Kate Buck, who had the very finest practitioners and the very finest teachers and still did not yield and still did not get a healing, and came finally to the realization that she was dying and that there was no hope. And in that sense, the thought came to her, well, I must give up trying to be healed. I guess I'm one of those who do not respond. I'll spend these last weeks or months trying to find God. Then when I pass, I will at least have a better opportunity of coming into God's presence. And the next day she awakened healed. The moment she gave up the effort to be healed and sought God, she was healed. Why was this? Well, she was violating the law all those 9 years. The law of spirit specifically says, take no thought for your life, nor what you shall eat or what you shall drink or wherewithal you shall be clothed. Your heavenly Father knoweth what things ye have need of, and it is his good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Seek ye the kingdom of God, and all these things will be answered. Now, how many people do you know who really come to a practitioner seeking God? Is it not true that they come seeking a healing, or seeking supply, or seeking something that is the result of going to God, and that cannot spiritually be done? It can be done physically. You can go physically and take some medicine and get rid of a physical disorder, or you can have surgery and have it cut out. On the physical plane, that operates. Anyone who says that materia medica is a failure just isn't aware of the great work that materia medica is doing on the material plane. Now then, you might take that same claim to a mental practitioner and also have it met, because all the mental practitioner is doing is substituting a belief of health for a belief of sickness. He just takes a person who is under the belief of being sick and changes him into a person who's under the belief of being well. Why is it only a belief of being well? Because it's subject to change again. Now, when then you come to a spiritual practitioner, a practitioner of the soul, of the spirit, and say, yes, can you get God to do this for me? Heal my body, heal my pocketbook, get me employment. The practitioner who knows the spirit says, no, I'm sorry. I haven't such an influence with God. I can bring God to you if you're interested. And by that time, many patients pack up their little bag and move on. Oh, I was ready for God, but I thought God would do something. No. I can't get you something. I can get you a conscious realization of God's presence, and then the things will be added unto you. Well, I don't have to tell you how many people cannot, even if they would, release themselves from the desire for person, place, and thing. You'd only have to see my mail for a few days to see how many people still are either trying to get a companion or get rid of one. You'd be surprised how many people, even after they have read the Infinite Way writings for a long period of time, still write to me and tell me that the left knee is bothering, but the right knee is better. In other words, they are still approaching God from a physical standpoint and expecting God to do something on a physical level. Do you see that? That is the same thing as I said, was it last night, about this protective work? If you think to use God to protect you from an accident, you have no knowledge of what God is. You can't use God to protect you from an accident. All you can do is to come into the awareness of God as your being. You won't find any accidents then. When you come into the presence of God, I can assure you, you will never find lack, limitation, injustice, sin, disease, or death. None of those things exist in the presence of God. Then what is needful for us? Come into the conscious awareness of the presence of God and stop trying to think in terms of demonstration. Accept the demonstration of God's presence. You see, it is as if we would say, I would like a mahogany chair, but I haven't any mahogany. Well, you can't have it. Or, well, let's forget the mahogany chair. Let's say I would like some mahogany. After you've gotten your mahogany, now you can have your chair, or you can have a table or a bench or anything else you like. First, have mahogany. So it is. You cannot have health or wealth or success or happiness separate and apart from God. But if you desire God, you will find embodied in God your health, your wealth, your success. Now, suppose you come to a practitioner of the Spirit, and this practitioner is praying for you for a realization of God. But you're not around there looking for that at all. You are sitting around looking for the fever to go down. Well, you're not on the same level of consciousness. How can you come into the demonstration when the demonstration isn't the reduction of fever? The demonstration is the presence of God. I have told this experience before of a lady who came to me wanting to sell a home which was now too big for them. And it was worth $23,000, but she was willing to take $13,000. And a whole month's work didn't result in the sale of that house. And she came back 6 months later and had another month of work, and it didn't result in the sale of that house. And then she said, I don't understand, Mr. Goldsmith. You have such a reputation for successful work, and yet it's failed in this case. Oh, I said, it's failed? How do you know it's failed? Well, the house hasn't been sold. Oh, I said, I wasn't working for the house to be sold. I'm not a real estate agent. Well, that's what I came for. Oh, well, you came to the wrong place. This isn't the right address. I was praying for a realization of God and God's government and God's guidance. Out of that could come anything. How do I know that you wouldn't be sorry to sell that house? How do I know it would be the wrong thing? Well, as it turned out later, it was only, or less than a year later, when that house sold for $23,000, and meantime she knew how to invest the money, which she didn't know when she came to me. What she had in mind would have caused her a very serious loss of her capital, besides only getting $13,000. Oh, but my work failed. Of course it failed from her standpoint. She was seeking the sale of a house. I was seeking God's guidance in her affairs. And so it is, many people may come to me and say, your work failed for me. I didn't get the healing. What healing did you want? I wanted the lump removed. Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, but I'm not a lump remover. Do you see the point? Do you see how we can fail to get healings? certainly, partly, and I will say mostly, the responsibility for healing is on the practitioner. It is really up to a practitioner to live so high in consciousness that everything, or nearly everything, responds to his or her work. Then it's up to the individual. If they then do not turn to the Spirit and start in to unfold a spiritual development, they have no complaint when something wallops them later. Do you see that? But the Master healed the 10 lepers. Only one came back to give thanks. Only one, in other words, came back. The Master wasn't interested in thanks. You can be assured of that. He meant that only one came back to show any interest in spiritual life or spiritual unfoldment. The others went along about their material way. Well, the Master had performed his function. He'd given them the healing. The rest was up to them. If no further good came to them, that was their problem. So it is, we in our work never sit in judgment as to whether a person deserves a healing or doesn't. We never try to say, it's your fault. No. When you bring the problem to us, we undertake it with the understanding that if we can rise high enough in consciousness, your need will be met. Although, if it would be bad for it to be met, at that particular moment, a delay would certainly be better. I've had the experience in my own student days of problems not being met. Many a problem was not met when I went to practitioners, but I have an idea that whatever is happening through me today may be traced back to those failures. Because if it did nothing else, it made me more determined to study and learn and find out the truth of being. Whereas if I had all of those problems met one after another, what incentive would there really have been to search deeper? It would have been meeting my need. In other words, it would have been filling my nets with fish, which was all I was seeking in those days. Just seeking harmony of body, harmony of mind, and harmony of business. Do you see that? Yes, and that is why with many of us, it is like Kate Buck. She was a young woman when that experience came to her, but she lived to be 94, 96, 97, something like that, and have 60 wonderful years as a wonderful practitioner. All because it took 9 years for her to wake up to the fact that God doesn't heal bodies. God just is. And as you come into the awareness of God's isness, you discover all of a sudden that the body is well. I am sure that probably most of you have had the experience of studying whatever form of truth you've been following, and had healings come for which you had no specific work done. When your mind wasn't on the specific healing, and then all of a sudden discovered it had happened. It had taken place. I had many of those experiences in my early days. Just studying and reading, I found things falling away from me without any specific treatment. Why? Because I wasn't seeking healing, I was seeking truth in those books. And the healings came of their own accord. Now, all of us will experience greater harmonies in proportion as we stop seeking greater harmonies and seek only a realization of God. In the degree that we find this realization of God, we will find the discords of sense disappearing. But here comes a most important lesson. Remember that many of our problems, if not most of them, have to do not with ourselves, but with our attachments. Because of our marriages, or our children, or our parents, or our relatives, or friends, or business associates, we are still carrying the burdens of their lack of demonstration. And so, as long as we have those ties, let us not complain too bitterly about those problems, but continue to work until they are all solved. Actually, you must start, as we did in the 15th chapter of John, with the realization that it is my conscious union with God that makes my demonstration. Then you see it would make no difference if we did no business today, or if we had no patients today, or we had no students today, or we had no cash income today. That would make no difference. Our conscious union with God would in some way come to bring about the meeting of our needs. Scripture is full of that. Moses had no income, but he had manna fall from the sky. Elijah had no congregation, but he found cakes baked on the stones and a widow sharing and the cruse of oil that never ran dry. And Jesus multiplied loaves and fishes. I mean, as long as you have your conscious union with God, your demonstration is safe. Only don't tie yourself up in your demonstration by believing that in this way, that way, or the other way, this person over here or this one here is acting to retard your demonstration. It never will. Not even your practitioner can hold back your healing. Not even your practitioner's lack of understanding can hold back your healing if you are realizing your conscious union with God. Let your healing come through a practitioner, but not from one. Your healing comes through your conscious union with God, your conscious oneness with God. Therefore, seek ye the kingdom of God. Seek ye the knowledge of God, the wisdom of God, the activity of God. Seek it where? Within yourself. If you read books, if you go to lectures, if you go to classes, let all that you learn be stepping stones. But don't look to those books or those lectures or those classes for your spiritual harmony. Look to God for those. And where is God? Closer to you than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. Too many people are still believing that their help comes from the practitioner, from the study, or from the classes. That's not where your help comes. Your help comes through that, not from it. It comes from the kingdom of God within your own being. So even while you're going to teacher, even if you were sitting at the feet of the Master, please remember that he said over and over again, why callest thou me good? I can of my own self do nothing. It's the Father that doeth the works. Never did he let you believe that he was the source of your good. He was the vine, but the Father was the husbandman. So the Father, through his awareness, fed you. And I say that to our students. You will find that when it comes out in the 15th chapter of John, you will find that I said that at this moment we are branches. Ye are branches, but I am the vine. And what is going out to you is coming from the Father, the husbandman, through me to you. But when you go out this door tonight, you are not the branch anymore, you are the vine. Because now you will see a world of people out there. They are the branches. Now it is you who are the vine, looking out at them and saying, the Father through me is feeding you. In other words, I am knowing the truth about you. I am loving you as I love myself. And so that means that I am the avenue through which God's love is flowing to you. So the practitioner is the vine to the patient, but God is the husbandman. The teacher is the vine to the student, but God is the source. But you are the vine to your family, to your friends, to your relatives, to your business associates, to this whole world at large. Every time you look at a newspaper headline or hear the radio, you become the vine. All that is before you are the branches, and now you are looking at them and saying, ah, yes, but through my spiritual understanding, I know God is operating in your consciousness, and that makes you the vine. Do you see that? That's the truth about all of us here. We ourselves are branches. Invisibly, there is a vine called Christ, and under that is the husbandman, the Father, the universal source of good. Now, in our temporary relation, Jesus becomes the vine. And through him, the Father within me doeth the works. I am the vine, and you're the branches that are being fed. Do you see that? And so it is. Every time that we function as a practitioner or teacher, we function as a vine onto the branches. Every time we're alone, we're the branch again, and the vine is the invisible presence within us that we call the Christ. Do you see that? But the Father, the husbandman, this universal good, that's where it all flows through. And that is its source. And that's why I say it isn't the love of your practitioner that will help you, and it isn't the understanding of your practitioner that will help you. It is the love of God and the understanding of God flowing through your practitioner as the vine that will help you. And so it isn't your understanding that will ever help anyone. It is God's understanding to which you let yourself be the avenue. As a composer sits down and permits melodies to flow through him, is the composer the creator of music? No, he's the avenue through which it flows. Is a poet the creator of poetry? No, he is the avenue through which it flows. Is an artist the creator of art? Why, heavens no, he's an instrument. He's a paintbrush in the hands of God, or a chisel and hammer in the hands of God. That's all an artist is. That's all a poet is. That's all a painter is. That's all we are. We are instruments in the hand of God. We are the vehicles or the tools used by the Father to show forth what? Our understanding? Heavens forbid. God's handiwork. We show forth God's handiwork. We show forth God's glory. Do you see that? Now, the healthier and happier and more prosperous you are, the greater witness you are to what? To your understanding? No. To God's grace flowing through you. And that's the word. God's grace. That is really the source of everything. God's grace. We are the recipients, we are the witnesses, we are the everything that receives God's grace, and we share it with each other. It doesn't belong to me, and it doesn't belong to you. Whether it's this truth pouring out, or whether it's dollar bills pouring out. It isn't mine to give, and it isn't yours to give. It's of the Father, divine grace, flowing through us. Thank you. We